The command came to Darth Maul as blue light in the darkness, and as a pressure inside the bones, a familiar tightening of the world around a single will, not his own. He knelt in the cramped hold of the Sith infiltrator with his hands resting on his knees and his back straight as a spear. Red light from the control panel stained the black hull around him and turned the tattoos on his face into strips of shadow laid over blood. Outside the ship, beyond the sealed skin of metal and the docking clamps that held the vessel buried inside the belly of the Trade Federation battleship, Naboo turned in silence like a pearl beneath a blade. Sidious rose out of the projector in blue fragments that became robes, hands, the soft mask of an old man's face hiding the thing beneath. To lesser eyes it was only a transmission. To Maul it was always more than that. It was ownership made visible. "The Viceroys are weak," Sidious said. "Weakness must be used, not corrected. Let fear move them where courage would fail." "Nah." Maul lowered his head. "The Jedi are aboard." "I know." The answer was mild, almost bored, but it carried contempt so deep it might have drowned a city. Maul felt the two Jedi as small and disciplined flames moving through the ship's labyrinth above him. Careful, patient, alive in the Force in a way he despised because he understood it so well. They moved with clarity. They moved with purpose. The galaxy rewarded such men with reverence and names like Guardian, Peacekeeper, Keeper of Balance. And Maul had been taught from childhood that each of those words was a lie the powerful told themselves before they struck. "Do nothing," Sidious said. "Not yet." Maul said nothing. He had been forged into obedience long ago, in pain so constant it had ceased to be pain and become architecture. But obedience was never emptiness. Beneath it there was always the blade of desire, and tonight desire pressed sharply at the back of his throat. The Jedi were near. The Federation had set its trap. The Queen of Naboo would be broken and used. Every moving piece had its place. And yet something else pulled at him. It had begun as a murmur hours earlier, a disturbance so faint he had almost mistaken it for some aftershock in the Force from Sidious plotting. It was not on Naboo. It was not on the battleship. It burned far away, rimward, beyond the polished lies of Senate space, in a place that tasted of sand and heat, and exposed wiring and cheap oil and hunger. It was not disciplined like a Jedi presence. It was not cold and coiled like a Sith. It was raw, radiant, vast enough that if he touched it directly with his awareness it hurt him. He had never known such a presence could belong to a living being. The transmission flickered. Sidious studied him with eyes that were never as soft as the face around them suggested. "You are distracted." Maul forced his thoughts into stillness. "No, my master." Sidious smiled without warmth. "Good. The Queen's ship will try to flee. The Jedi may complicate matters. Complications are often opportunities, but only for those who are patient." The image dissolved. Maul remained kneeling after it vanished, because movement was a kind of confession, and he would not confess even to the dark. Above him, the two Jedi cut their way into the Federation's deception. He could feel the panic of the Neimoidians blooming like rot through a sealed hold. He could feel the first droid legions waking. He could feel the Queen's fear in some distant chamber of the ship, veiled by dignity and duty and the habits of rank. And beyond them all, impossibly far and impossibly bright, he could still feel that other presence. He closed his eyes and followed the impression. Dust. Metal clattering on metal. The cries of vendors. The low pulse of engines tuned by hand. An immense loneliness wrapped around hope so stubborn it did not know it had no right to exist. For an instant, he thought he heard a child laugh. His eyes opened. The Jedi broke free of the trap. Blaster fire flashed somewhere above. The Queen's cruiser launched from the hangar and vanished into the velvet dark. The Neimoidians wailed. Armies descended on Naboo in gray ranks while diplomats spoke of treaties and legality. The galaxy always dressed its violence before serving it. Maul remained still until the final order came. Not from the hollow this time, but through encrypted signal and the hard certainty of Sidious' mind erected like a knife. Find them. He rose in one smooth motion. The Sith infiltrator opened to receive him like a black mouth. He slid into the pilot's seat and brought the vessel to life. Systems awakened around him with a predatory hum. The ship disengaged, folded out into the cold dock, and then into vacuum beyond. Somewhere ahead, the Queen's crippled cruiser had limped toward the outer rim. Some navigator on some bridge would soon speak the desert world's name. Maul did not need to hear it. He could already taste its sun-scorched wind at the back of his teeth. Tatooine. He entered hyperspace with the sensation still burning against his mind. As starlight became tunnels of white fire, Maul let himself touch that distant presence one more time. Not fully. Never fully. Just enough to know that it was real, that he had not imagined it, that somewhere on a forgotten slave world there lived a heart large enough to disturb the current of the Force itself. He did not yet know whether it was a weapon, a threat, or an answer to a question he had never dared form. He only knew he wanted to see it. On Tatooine, morning did not so much arrive as descend in sheets of heat. The light over Mos Espa was white and pitiless from the first instant, turning stone to glare and iron to punishment. By mid-morning every awning sagged, every engine gave off the stink of hot metal, and every living creature in the market moved with the economy of those who knew exactly how much water remained between themselves and disaster. Anakin Skywalker loved it anyway. He loved the racket of the place, the yelling vendors and hissing repulsor lifts, and the mutter of bets passing from hand to greedy hand. He loved the broken things stacked in Watto's shop because broken things could be understood. Anything with a fault had a pattern, and anything with a pattern could be fixed if you were patient and listened to it long enough. Machines talked, not with words but with resistance and complaint, and the tremor in a housing plate before it gave way. Anakin had always understood them better than most people. He was hanging half upside down inside the cavity of a power coupling when he heard voices in the street and slid out onto the shop floor, his hands black with grease. Jar Jar Binks filled the doorway first, all panic and limbs. Behind him came a bearded man in worn robes, and a girl dressed like a handmaiden, but carrying herself as if she had forgotten to be ordinary. The man's eyes went everywhere without seeming hurried. The girl's face was composed, but not with the dull obedience of servants he knew. She looked at the world as if she expected it to answer for itself. Watto drifted in from the back room, wings buzzing. No money, no parts. That's how it is. My Damen, Adler. He sighed. The robed man smiled, not because he was amused, but because the truth of Watto's greed interested him very little. I'm not asking for charity, only a fair exchange. No Republic credits, Watto snapped. They're no good out here. Anakin wiped his hands on his tunic and stared openly. The girl noticed and met his gaze. Her eyes were dark and tired, but there was something kind in the way she looked at him. Not pity. He hated pity. Something gentler. The robed man had the oddest presence Anakin had ever felt. Not felt exactly. More like the air near him was somehow calmer than the rest of the room, even with Watto grumbling and Jar Jar knocking into a crate of rusted couplings. "You're a Jedi?" Anakin asked before he could stop himself. Watto barked a laugh. "If he is, he's a poor one." The man looked down at him. "What makes you think that?" Anakin shrugged, trying to seem less interested than he was. "The way you move, like you're listening to something." The girl glanced from one to the other. Watto made a disgusted sound. The man crouched until they were nearly eye level. And what does a mechanic's apprentice know about listening? "Everything," Anakin nearly said. Instead, he answered with the caution of a slave child who knew curiosity could be expensive. "Sometimes things tell you what's wrong if you pay attention." A shadow of surprise moved through the man's face. "Do they?" Anakin nodded. "Mostly machines. People are harder." Jar Jar made a helpless noise of agreement. The girl smiled in spite of herself. The man straightened. "We need a hyperdrive part. Your master says he can't accept our currency." "He won't," Anakin said. "Not unless it's worth something to him." "And what's worth something to him?" "Winning." Watto puffed up. "I always win." The words came out of Anakin before he had decided to say them. "I can help." Watto turned. "You? You'll help me lose money, that's what you'll do." "I know a way." Anakin looked from Watto to the strangers. "If you trust me." The girl's expression changed then. Whatever role she was pretending to play, she could not hide the relief that touched her face like cool water. The robed man studied Anakin in silence for a few beats, and Anakin had this sudden impossible feeling that he was being measured by something much larger than a glance. "What's your name?" the man asked. "Anakin." "Anakin what?" "Skywalker." The man's gaze sharpened very slightly. "I'm Qui-Gon Jinn." The name landed in Anakin with strange weight. He did not know why. The girl started to speak and checked herself, as if remembering a part she had to maintain. "I'm Padme," she said. "Padme Daw." The name suited her less than the face did. Or maybe it suited it too well. Anakin could not tell. She did not seem like anyone who ought to be standing in the dust of Watto's shop pretending not to matter. "Are you an angel?" he asked her, and regretted it the instant it left his mouth because Watto cackled and Jar Jar nearly swallowed his own tongue laughing. But Padme did not mock him. She only blinked, surprised, and then her mouth softened at one corner. "No," she said. "Have you seen one?" "Not really, but I heard they're beautiful." Qui-Gon looked almost as if he might laugh. "Almost." Watto, sensing the room shifting away from him, flapped forward irritably. "Enough. No money, no part. Let them leave." "Dem. They can come to my house," Anakin said. "Mom will know what to do. She always does." Watto narrowed his eyes. "And who's going to fix the treadwell if you go wandering off with every lost creature in Mos Espa?" "I'll fix it when I get back." "You'll fix it now." Qui-Gon's hand moved a fraction, not in threat but in stillness. The air in the shop seemed to deepen around him. "Let the boy show us the way," he said. Watto opened his mouth, shut it, blinked twice, then waved one claw with abrupt irritation. "Fine. You. Go. But if you bring them back here expecting charity, I'll throw you all into the street." "Nani?" Anakin grinned. It happened before he could stop it, broad and bright, and utterly unguarded. It transformed his whole face. Padme looked at him as if she had forgotten, for that instant, whatever burden she carried from the stars. Outside, the day hit them like a furnace. Anakin stepped into it gladly. He led them through the press of the market, talking too much because excitement always broke words loose inside him. He told them about Boonta Eve, about pod engines, about the racers no one sane would bet against, and the one slave boy who could fly better than all of them. He pointed out shops, mechanics, gamblers, thieves. He did not tell them which roofs the slavers used when they wanted to watch without being watched, or which alleys you ran to if a deal turned violent. He did not know them well enough for that. Qui-Gon listened. Padme listened too, and there was grief in her attention, as though each casual cruelty of the city cost her something. When they reached the small, half-buried home at the edge of the quarter, Anakin paused with his hand on the panel. For the first time since meeting them, doubt touched him. Hope always came with a bruise already forming beneath it. Strangers did not arrive and change the shape of a life. He knew that. He had always known that. Even so, his heart beat hard as he opened the door. "Mom," he called. "We have guests." Shmi Skywalker welcomed them with the poise of a queen who had been handed the wrong kingdom and had chosen to keep her grace anyway. The house was small, its walls worn smooth by sand and years, but clean. The lamps gave off a honey-colored light. A bowl of food simmered over heat coils in the corner. Parts lay neatly ordered on one table, scraps of wire and polished bits of plating arranged not as junk but as unfinished intention. In another corner stood a protocol droid still missing pieces, its skeletal frame draped with a cloth to keep dust out of the joints. The place smelled of metal, stew, soap, and the faint dry sweetness of the desert pressing at the seams. Anakin shed excitement and words in a rush. He introduced everyone at once, tripped over himself explaining the need for a hyperdrive part, talked about wagers and pod engines, and the impossibility of Republic credits on Tatooine. Through it all, Shmi listened with one hand resting briefly on her son's shoulder, steadying him without quieting him. Qui-Gon watched the touch more than the words. Padme helped set out bowls despite Shmi's mild protests. Jar Jar folded himself awkwardly into a corner as if afraid of knocking the house over by breathing too hard. The meal was plain and tasted wonderful because it had been made by hands that understood want. Anakin ate quickly at first, then slower when he remembered guests and manners. He kept glancing at Padme as if checking whether she found his world ridiculous. She did not. If anything, she looked as though each kindness here unsettled her more than Mos Espa's cruelties had. "I'm building 3PO, Anakin announced at one point, leaping to his feet and dragging the cloth from the half-finished droid. "He'll help Mom, mostly with things I'm too short to reach." Shmi laughed softly. "That is not what you told me. I said he'd help you with everything. And you still would, I'm sure." 3PO's photoreceptors were dark, but the shape of duty already clung to him. Padme moved closer, wonder easing the tension in her face. "You built him?" "Mostly." Anakin tried not to sound proud and failed entirely. "I can build anything." "Well, not anything, but a lot." "You built a pod too?" she asked. He nodded. "I'm the only human who can race." Shmi's hand tightened around her bowl. It was a tiny motion, but fear lived in it. Qui-Gon's gaze moved to her and then back to the boy. "And why can you race when no other human can?" Anakin shrugged. "I just can see things before they happen. Not always, but enough." The quiet that followed was small and immense. Qui-Gon asked the question gently. "May I take a blood sample?" Anakin blinked. "Why?" "To settle a curiosity." Shmi looked wary for only a moment before something in Qui-Gon's manner calmed her. She nodded. Anakin offered his hand with all the brave nonchalance of a child, trying not to look afraid of a tiny needle. The sample disappeared into a handheld analyzer. Qui-Gon glanced at the readout, and for the first time that day his control truly cracked. Not outwardly. No one but another disciplined observer would have seen it. But Anakin saw his eyes still and sharpen, saw the man's breath catch by the width of a thread. Padme saw it too. "What is it?" she asked. "Nothing I can explain yet." But his voice said it was not nothing at all. Later, after the meal, after Jar Jar's clumsy apology over a broken utensil had been forgiven and forgotten, after Padme had listened to Anakin talk about the stars with the solemn concentration of someone in the presence of a priest, the house settled into evening. Outside, Mos Espa's noise faded to a deeper animal murmur. Sand hissed against the buried lower walls. Somewhere in the distance a pod engine was revved and cursed into silence. And across the city, hidden beneath a hood the color of old bone, Maul walked the slave quarter with a predator's patience. The desert offended him. Not because it was harsh, but because it was honest. Nothing here concealed hunger under silk or law. Everything wanted. Everything lacked. The market stank of buying and selling, of bodies counted as property and lives measured by utility. It should have pleased him. The Sith had no use for sentiment. Yet, the nakedness of Tatooine's cruelty unsettled something he would rather have severed than named. In the polished worlds of the Republic, chains were painted over. Here they gleamed in plain sight. Probe droids whispered above him, feeding him vectors and heat traces and snippets of speech. The Queen's people were located. The Jedi were near them. Sidious's command remained simple. Track, confirm, strike when the moment opened. Maul followed the strongest thread and found himself not at the edge of royalty, but before a half-buried hovel dimly lit from within. He stopped in the shadow of a moisture condenser and closed his eyes. There. Not merely bright, endless. The presence within that small house poured through the Force with a wild, unshielded radiance that made his teeth ache. It was not refined. It did not know how to hide itself. He felt longing, fear, mechanical fascination, loyalty fierce as instinct, love for a mother, hunger for stars, and beneath all of it a power vast enough to warp the stillness around it. A child's mind should have been scattered, quicksilver, hard to follow. This one was a sun, seen through thin walls. Voices drifted through the panel seams. Shmai's low murmur. Padme's softer reply. The strange amphibian's muttering. Qui-Gon's measured tone. And the boy's voice, eager, bright, impossible not to hear once heard. Ani, the mother called him. Anakin, the Jedi said. Skywalker. Maul opened his eyes and looked at the door as though he could see through it. He had been taught that all beings were clay to be broken into shape. He had broken many. He had never envied one. But there in the dark he felt, for the first time in years, a sensation so foreign it struck him almost like nausea. Not pity. Not tenderness. Recognition. The boy was a slave, and he blazed. Maul could have stepped inside. He could have ignited his blade, cut down the Jedi before the tiny house understood it had become a battlefield, and ended the strange disturbance forever. The thought passed through him with perfect clarity. He did not take it. Instead, he stood in the night wind and listened to the child laugh. When at last he turned away, it was with the knowledge that he had disobeyed Sidious in the most dangerous way possible. Not by defiance, but by desire. Before dawn on the day of the race, Mos Espa began trembling in its sleep. Bets were being laid while the sky was still violet. Mechanics shouted over coolant leaks and stress fractures. Beasts groaned in their pens. Racers with more scars than sense stalked toward the course with entourages, talismans, and the false swagger of men who had made peace with death, only because they thought fear visible in others made them safer. Anakin woke before the alarm buzzed. For a moment, he lay in the dim room listening to the house breathe around him. Shmi was already awake. He could hear the tiny sounds she made when she tried not to wake him and failed, because mothers never moved quietly in the ears of their children. He sat up at once, grinning into the dark, then remembered what day it was and felt his stomach drop and leap at the same time. Boonta Eve. He dressed fast, hands fumbling only once when he caught sight of the small bundle of things his mother had been mending for him late into the night. There was no point thinking about all the ways the race could go wrong. Every race could go wrong. That was the point. The course was not forgiving. Engines tore apart. Canyon walls came too close. Rivals cheated. Sebulba would cheat because Sebulba always cheated and because he hated being reminded that a human child could do what he could not. Shmi turned as Anakin rushed into the main room. Fear was already in her eyes, hiding beneath a smile she had put there for him. He ate first. I'm not hungry. You are. He was when she set the food in front of him. Padme and Qui-Gon arrived soon after, and the room changed around them. Padme had tied her hair back more simply than before, but she still carried dignity like some people carried perfume. Qui-Gon was quiet, more inward than usual. Anakin noticed the difference because he noticed everything in anyone he trusted even a little. Is something wrong? He asked. Qui-Gon looked at him, and for the briefest instant, Anakin had the uncanny sensation that the man was standing in two places at once. In the room, and somewhere far beyond it, listening for a storm no one else could hear. Then the moment vanished. Nothing you need carry into the race, he said. Today you fly. Outside, above the low roofs, Maul lay flat against sun-baked stone and watched. He had chosen the roof long before dawn, tracing lines of sight and escape through the city like veins on a flayed organ. Two probe droids floated at different heights, feeding him images, heat maps, snippets of movement. He needed only one, but he had always preferred excess in the service of certainty. He saw Watto bullion laborers near the pit garage. He saw Sebulba arrive with his swaggering pack in the heat of his malice. He saw Padme step from the house, pause, and lay one hand briefly against Anakin's shoulder. The touch altered nothing and told him everything. The girl cared for the boy. The Jedi cared for the boy too, though he hid it in detachment. Even the mother, standing in the doorway with her hands folded hard together, seemed less merely protective than reverent, as if she knew without language that she had brought into the world something no world deserved. Maul's gaze followed Anakin as the child crossed the yard toward the patched-together pod. The machine looked one hard turn from disintegration, all stripped housings and exposed couplings in audacity. The boy moved around it with confidence that bordered on intimacy. He rested one hand against a housing bracket and closed his eyes for an instant, as though listening. Maul felt the force shift around him. Not used, not summoned, simply obeyed, the way he'd obeyed a star. Anakin lifted the tarp free and began checking the engines, speaking under his breath to the machine as if it could be soothed into loyalty. A pit droid rolled near, chirping anxiously. The boy nudged it aside with one knee, gentle even in haste. A moment later, Sebulba shouldered past one of Watto's workers and laughed loud enough to be heard across the yard. The sound changed Anakin's posture immediately. Not much. A hardening through the spine, a tightening at the jaw. Anger arrived in him like something natural and long acquainted, not shameful, not hidden. He mastered it, but Maul saw the way it sharpened the boy rather than clouding him. That more than the power struck him. Passion disciplined by necessity. Fury yoked to survival. A slave child already learning to sheath emotion without surrendering it. The Jedi would call it dangerous. The Sith would call it useful. Maul, watching from shadows, saw in it something still rarer, truth unbroken by doctrine. A gust of wind blew dust across the roof. Beneath him, the city glowed orange and red in the newborn sun, every rough wall edged with fire. The light made Mos Espa look less like a settlement than a wound left open to the sky. He heard a voice inside his memory, one of Sidious' old lessons years ago and spoken over the body of some creature Maul had been ordered to dismantle and understand. Attachment makes slaves. Desire makes tools. Only dominion frees. Maul had believed it. He believed it still, perhaps. But the child below him did not look free of desire. He looked made of it. Qui-Gon emerged from the house, his robes stirring in the wind. He said something low to Shmi. She nodded, though terror had blanched her. Anakin came to her next. Maul could not hear the first words, only the silence between them. Then the boy embraced her with all the fierceness he had kept out of his face. Shmi held him tightly and let him go because mothers of slaves learned to release what they could not save. Maul felt a brutal, unwanted memory stir at the edge of consciousness and crushed it before it formed. The crowd began pouring toward the arena and the course. Horns blared in the distance. Engines coughed awake. A chant started, ugly and joyous. Boonta Eve did not honor courage. It devoured it for entertainment. Maul rose from the roof in one fluid movement and went after them through the shadows, keeping the boy always within the far edge of his sight. He had come to hunt a queen and her Jedi protectors. By the time the sun cleared the city walls, he knew the true quarry on Tatooine was not royalty at all. The Boonta Eve Classic was part slaughterhouse, part carnival, part prayer shouted by men who had forgotten what mercy sounded like. The crowd packed itself into the viewing stands and along every line of the course where death might come close enough to be thrilling. Gamblers sweated through fine robes and rags alike. Bookmakers barked odds. Traders raised cups and curses in equal measure. Children perched where they should not and were dragged back only if a parent remembered to fear for them. Even the heat seemed eager. From beneath a stone arch blackened by old sandstorms, Maul watched the starting grid through a tangle of bodies. He wore obscurity like another weapon. Hood low, hands hidden, posture made forgettable by discipline. He would have passed for any hard traveler with credits tucked close and blood not worth notice. Only his eyes betrayed him, and those no one saw. Watto ricocheted from racer to racer on buzzing wings, his excitement so naked it made him ridiculous. Jar Jar stumbled through a knot of gamblers, apologizing with such frantic sincerity that more than one man forgot to shove him. Padme sat rigid in the stands beside Shmi, both of them trying to pretend calm was possible. Qui-Gon stood rather than sat. The Jedi's stillness marked him more than any robe could have. On the grid, Anakin climbed into the cockpit. For one heartbeat, the noise of the arena seemed to fall away from him. His hands settled on the controls. His chin lifted. The wind tugged at his hair, and he looked not 9 years old but ancient with focus, as though some older self had stepped forward to borrow his body. Maul leaned very slightly toward the track. A Podrace was chaos worshipped as sport. Repulsor turbines screaming at impossible speed. Split-second timing through canyon throats, boulder fields, rock spires, Tuscan territory, wreckage, sabotage, and the ever-present possibility that steel would become shrapnel faster than a body could scream. No creature without advanced reflexes should have survived it. No human ever had. Yet the boy on the grid looked less frightened than hungry. Flags dropped. Engines howled. The racers exploded forward in a storm of sand and sound. For a moment the mass of them was unreadable, only noise and velocity. Then patterns emerged. Sebulba driving with murderous cunning. Gasgano too wide into the first bend. Teamto moving like panic with power behind it. And through the jagged opening and closing of those monstrous machines, Anakin slipping impossibly clean between near collisions, as if the race had already happened somewhere inside him, and he was merely remembering it fast enough to stay alive. The force around him was not calm. It was a storm given purpose. Maul felt every shift. The boy sensed danger an instant before danger became visible. He reacted before conscious thought had time to dress itself as decision. When a coupling clipped loose and whipped past the cockpit, Anakin ducked without looking. When another racer slid across his lane, the pod jerked into open space so narrow, no rational being would have called it space at all. When Sebulba's sabotage finally took effect and one engine hiccuped, a flash of fear hit the boy, sharp and white, and then became anger, and the anger became action. To most in the stands he was lucky. To Qui-Gon he was gifted. To Maul, watching with pupils narrowed in the dim shade, Anakin was revelation. He had never seen such ease. Even trained Jedi fought the Force in subtle ways, shaping themselves to its disciplines, accepting its permissions. The boy did not ask. He moved as if he were part of its first impulse. Raw power, yes, but more than that, intimacy. Dangerous intimacy. The kind that would terrify monks and tempt monsters. The crowd rose and screamed as the racers disappeared into the canyons and then re-emerged in intervals of dust and thunder. Shmi did not scream. She sat with both hands folded so tightly her knuckles whitened, and every time Anakin flashed past she seemed to stop breathing altogether. Padme watched with her whole face, hope and dread naked on it. Once during a pass so tight it nearly sheared the right engine free, her hand went out and gripped Shmi's wrist. Neither woman appeared aware of it. Qui-Gon never moved at all. The second lap took blood from the field. One racer burst apart against stone. Another vanished in a plume of sand and fire. Sebulba began hunting rather than racing, drifting too close, forcing lines, using his heavier engines to intimidate. Anakin should have yielded. Any sane child would have. Instead, the boy's mouth set in a line Maul had already come to recognize. The world narrowed around him. Fear burned off. Only will remained. Good, Maul said softly to no one. The final stretch became a duel of nerve. Sebulba spat flame and malice from his engines. Anakin drove as if death had to catch him honestly or not at all. In the end, it was not strength that decided it, but audacity. The boy cut tighter, trusted harder, held his machine together by instinct and hunger and the impossible luck of the Force itself. And when he burst across the finish, the arena's roar struck the city walls like weather. Anakin flung both arms up, half laughing, half disbelieving. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the edge of a smile touched Maul's mouth. Then his comlink trembled against his wrist. He stepped deeper beneath the arch, away from the crush of celebration, and activated the encrypted channel. Sidious appeared in miniature blue light against the dark stone. "Report? The Queen's vessel is repaired," Maul said. "And the Jedi? Still with her. Then you have wasted enough time among vermin. Intercept them before they leave the planet." The order was clean. Absolute. Maul inclined his head. Sidious studied him for a beat too long. "There is something else." "No, my master." But there was, and both of them knew it. Sidious's image leaned closer by less than an inch, yet the gesture filled the air with threat. "Do not let curiosity become attachment. The Jedi are the priority. The Queen is the strategy. All else is dust." "Noah, Kanda." The transmission ended. Maul stood alone with the noise of the arena battering the stone around him. In the sunlight beyond the arch, Anakin was being dragged laughing from the cockpit by mechanics and friends and delighted strangers. Watto spun madly in the air, victorious and avaricious. Shmi wept openly now that the race was over and her son still breathed. Padme smiled at the boy, as though she had been waiting all her life for someone to prove courage and innocence could survive in the same body. "Dust," Sidious had said. Maul looked at Anakin Skywalker and knew his master was wrong. Farewell came too quickly, as true farewells always did. Once the part was won and fitted, once the wager had been honored and the Queen's people had gathered themselves for flight, the day seemed to collapse inward. There were checks to be made, hatches to seal, supplies to move. There were words no one wanted to say and no one could avoid. The suns were lowering when Anakin stood beside his mother at the foot of the ramp and discovered that victory could feel more like a wound than a prize. Shmi held his face in both hands. Her composure had returned, but it was built now on sacrifice, and sacrifice made beauty of some people in ways joy never could. "Listen to me," she said. "You can't stop for fear, understand? You be brave, and you do what is right." His throat hurt. "I'll come back for you." She smiled then, and that was the cruelest thing, because he could feel how much the smile cost her. "You're already doing the thing I hoped for. Don't carry me like a chain." He wanted to promise everything. Freedom. Return. A future large enough to hold them both. But he was still a boy standing on the dirt of a slave world with tears burning in his eyes. So he only embraced her and clung for one desperate moment to the smell of oil and soap and home. From the lip of a distant dune, Maul watched through macrobinoculars and through the Force, which was the sharper sight. The parting struck him more deeply than the race had. He would not have admitted it under torture, but truth did not care for admission. The boy's grief blazed almost as hard as his power. Every thread in him pulled backward toward the mother and forward toward the stars at once. That tension would mark him for life. Maul could feel it settling into the boy's spirit like molten metal poured into a mold. Qui-Gon ushered Anakin up the ramp. Padme lingered just long enough to press Shmi's hands between her own. Then the hatch began to close. The moment opened. Maul launched the speeder from behind the dune and drove it across the sand at murderous speed. The ship's engines were bright, repulsors humming, ramp half raised. Dust peeled away from his approach in twin waves. Alarms sounded on the cruiser. Someone shouted from within. Qui-Gon turned, and Maul saw the recognition hit the Jedi a fraction before the green blade snapped alive in his hands. Maul leapt from the bike still moving. His saber staff ignited in a burst of red from both ends and struck in the same movement, a wheel of light cutting for throat, hip, and heart in one seamless line. Qui-Gon met it with a block so exact it seemed less learned than remembered. The impact shrieked through the desert air. Sand burst beneath their feet. Behind the Jedi, the ramp kept rising. Anakin stood frozen inside the glow of the hold, eyes wide. For an instant, Maul saw the boy not as a child, but as a witness chosen by fate itself, and something savage and triumphant flared in him. "Good," he thought. "See me." Qui-Gon pressed forward with a style unlike the formal precision Maul had expected. There was economy in it. but not rigidity. Compassion had not made him soft. It had made him unpredictable. He yielded ground only to take a deadlier angle. He accepted imbalance because he trusted he could recover. It was infuriating and exhilarating. Maul attacked harder. He was bred for violence and trained beyond mercy. His body understood combat as language. Red lights spun through dusk. He drove the Jedi backward in a storm of cuts, each one testing, learning, adjusting. The desert swallowed lesser sounds. The ship engines shouted warnings, the fading whine of the speeder on its final skid, and held only the crack and hiss of blade against blade. Yet even while he fought, Maul listened elsewhere. Anakin's fear hit him from the ship like a thrown stone. Not the helpless fear of prey, but the shocked, furious fear of one who sees power, stripped bare for the first time, and knows at once that he will never again be content with smaller truths. The boy was imprinting on the moment. Maul could feel it, could feel himself being written into a mind already larger than it knew. The hatch sealed. The cruiser lifted. Qui-Gon shifted tactics at once, abandoning any thought of victory in favor of delay. He fought only to keep Maul from boarding. Clever. Loyal. Worthy of killing. Maul's staff whirled, red arcs carving the twilight. "You protect them poorly," he said, his voice low beneath the clash. Qui-Gon's answer was breath and steel. "Better than you serve." Maul almost laughed. The blade caught his and slid. Sparks cascaded. The ship rose higher. Sand thrashed around them in the wash of its engines. For one instant, the cruiser's side viewport flashed with reflected fire, and in it Maul saw the faint outline of Anakin pressed near the transparent steel, looking down. Boy and warrior. Slave and weapon. Two lives staring across the widening space between them. Then the ship surged upward, and the image vanished into the darkening sky. Qui-Gon broke contact and sprang backward toward safety, toward distance, toward whatever transport the Jedi had cached beyond sight. Maul could have pursued for several more exchanges, perhaps even killed him if fortune bent the right way. But the Queen's vessel was already beyond his reach, and Sidious prized results over spectacle. He let the Jedi go. Not from mercy. Never mercy. From calculation. The green blade remained raised between them for a final breath. Wind tore at robe and cloak alike. The suns bled out across the dunes, staining the horizon the same red as Maul's weapon. "You carry a great burden," Qui-Gon said unexpectedly. It was such a Jedi thing to say, that Maul almost struck him for the insult of it. Instead, he deactivated one end of the staff, then the other, letting the sudden absence of light deepen the dark between them. "You know nothing of burden," he said. Qui-Gon did not answer. Perhaps because he had seen enough in the fight to know words were useless. Perhaps because the last thing he felt from Maul was not hate, though hate was there in abundance, but want. The Jedi withdrew. Maul stood alone in the desert long after the sounds were gone. Night came down quickly, cool and immense. Above him the stars emerged one by one, indifferent witnesses. Somewhere among them the Queen's ship was carrying Anakin Skywalker toward Coruscant. Maul looked up until the sky hurt his eyes. Then he went to his bike, mounted, and turned the nose of it toward his own waiting vessel. The boy had seen him. That mattered more than Sidious would ever understand. Coruscant rose out of space like the impossible dream of a species that had mistaken height for transcendence. Anakin saw it first through the cruiser's forward viewport and forgot, for a few breaths, every grief that had crossed the desert with him. The planet was all city, all light, all lanes of traffic braided around towers so tall they seemed to stab the stars rather than merely reflect them. It was magnificent. It was ugly. It was too much to understand at once, and therefore perfect. Padme watched his face as they descended and felt her own heart tighten. He should have arrived in such a place by invitation, not by rescue. He should have had a mother's hand in his and wonder unbroken by exile. But the galaxy did not sort souls by deserving. The ship entered lower air. Towers became facades. Facades became windows. Windows became rooms where people lived whole lives above streets Anakin could barely imagine. By the time they landed, he was dizzy with possibility. The Jedi Temple sobered him again. It was not the stone that did it, though the place carried age in every line. It was the quiet. Coruscant outside roared with traffic, law, wealth, purpose, and endless ambition. Inside the temple there was silence so complete it felt curated. Anakin's own thoughts grew louder in it. His longing for Shmi, his confusion, his excitement, his fear that if anyone looked too closely, they would discover he did not belong. All of it seemed to echo against polished floors and high windows. Qui-Gon led him before the council with a steadiness that should have comforted him and almost did. Obi-Wan Kenobi stood nearby. Younger than Anakin had expected a Jedi Knight to seem. His concern hidden beneath discipline. The masters themselves formed a ring of unreadable faces. Yoda small and ancient, Mace Windu severe as carved stone. Others no less watchful for being less stern. Questions followed. Do you miss your mother? Yes. Are you afraid? Yes. What do you dream of? The answers came harder than pod racing. It was not that Anakin wished to lie. It was that the truth felt like a rope they were tugging him across. He saw disapproval gather in small signs. The pause before a new question. The angle of a mouth. The chill of attention when he spoke of fear. They talked around him as much as to him. Too old. Too attached. Clouded future. Danger. He did not understand how men who claimed to value peace could look at a frightened child and sound so much like gates closing. Qui-Gon argued. His voice stayed calm, but conviction moved beneath it like deep water. He spoke of the Force with a certainty that startled even some among the council. He spoke as if destiny were not a poem but a fact standing in the room. Anakin waited while strangers measured the shape of his life. Elsewhere in the city, beneath layers of traffic and durasteel and the clean hypocrisy of political light, Maul knelt in a chamber no one on any official map would admit existed. The room had no ornament. Sidious hated any object not in active service to power. One narrow window looked across a canyon of towers. The millions moving far below were only motion, only statistics in flesh, only future leverage. Blue hololight stained the chamber walls. The Senate fractures as expected, Sidious said. The Queen has done her part without understanding it. Valorum will fall. Maul kept his eyes lowered. And the Jedi. They cling to procedure while events outpace them. It is why they will lose. The words should have pleased him. Ordinarily they would have. Tonight his attention tracked elsewhere, through layers of stone and distance, toward the temple high above, and the one mind within it that refused to dim. You encountered a child on Tatooine, Sidious said lightly. The chamber's air seemed to thin. Maul did not lift his head. I encountered many things on Tatooine. Do not insult me with evasions learned from lesser beings. Silence followed. Somewhere beyond the window a lane of speeders flashed by like a river of knives. Maul knew better than to lie twice. He chose precision instead. The boy was strong. Strength is common. Sidious's tone made the word filth. Not this strength. That drew a pause. At last, Sidious said, the Jedi have found him interesting as well. Maul looked up despite himself. The hooded figure in blue light was smiling a little, and there was cruelty in the smile deeper than mere malice. Cruelty enjoyed anticipation. Cruelty liked to let hope ripen before cutting it down. What are they calling him? Sidious asked. A possibility? A prophecy? Such words comfort fools who fear the scale of power when it appears uninvited. Maul's jaw tightened. Then he should not be left to them. At that, Sidious's eyes sharpened to points of yellow gold behind the hologram's age-soft disguise. And why does that concern you? The question was a trap with no honest answer survivable. Maul bowed his head again. Because any force of that magnitude left untended becomes a threat. Sidious leaned back slightly. That is almost wisdom. Almost. Always almost. Sidious rationed approval like poison. "The boy is not your concern," he continued. "If the Jedi train him, they will wound him. If they deny him, they will wound him differently. Either road may serve us. You will not reach for what has not been offered." Maul heard more in the words than they contained. His master was interested. More than interested. Calculating. The realization struck like a spike under the ribs. "Return your attention to Naboo," Sidious said. "The Queen is reckless enough to go back. The Jedi go with her. Finish what was begun." The transmission died. Maul remained kneeling, though nothing required it now. Outside the slit window, Coruscant glittered and lied and schemed. In the temple far above, the boy's mind glowed through the Force like a wound in daylight. That night, Anakin slept poorly, in a chamber that was cleaner and safer than any place he had ever known. Dreams came broken and bright. His mother standing in a doorway half buried by sand. Pod engines screaming through stone corridors. The council's cold faces. The red flash of a blade in twilight. At the edge of the dream there was another presence. Horned and silent, not speaking but watching. Its attention so fierce it seemed almost like touch. Anakin woke with his heart pounding and the taste of dust in his mouth. Far below, in his hidden chamber, Maul opened his eyes at the same instant. Neither knew why. By morning the Queen had chosen to return to Naboo. The Council had refused to stop Qui-Gon, and the city had already moved on to new scandals. Coruscant devoured events the way Tatooine devoured moisture. But beneath the machinery of politics and fate, something quieter had begun. Maul did not yet have a plan. He had something more dangerous. He had patience and a name. Naboo smelled nothing like Tatooine. The difference struck Anakin the instant the hatch opened. Instead of dust and hot metal there was damp earth, green things bruised by rain, stone old enough to have known weather as a companion rather than an enemy. Even the light seemed gentler. It filtered through leaves and mist and drifting smoke from distant fighting, never once flaying the world raw the way twin suns did. He should have liked it. He did, in parts. But beauty had begun to feel suspect to him, because beauty was always where people expected sacrifice to look noble. The return to Naboo was not a triumph, but a gamble with ceremony wrapped around it. Padme cast off her handmaiden's disguise and stepped into queenship as if she had never left it. Though Anakin had seen enough of her now to know the role cost her far more than others guessed. In the great chamber of the Gungans, where the air smelled of wet stone and living water, she knelt before Boss Nass and offered humility without surrendering purpose. The gesture changed the day. Armies moved because of it. Anakin watched from behind the adults, feeling small and in the way, and yet unable to shake the sense that every choice anyone made now somehow touched him too. The Council had not accepted him. Obi-Wan looked at him with a duty not yet warmed into trust. Qui-Gon had promised training anyway, in the calm tone of a man deciding the shape of his own disobedience. It should have settled Anakin. Instead, it left him drifting between futures, belonging fully to none. War preparations spread through the palace and the field camps with unnerving speed. Blasters checked. Speeders fueled. Pilots briefed. Maps argued over. Orders repeated until fear could mistake them for certainty. Adults became purpose-built creatures in wartime, their faces narrowing into intention. Even Jar Jar somehow acquired gravity when given command enough to trip over. Padme found Anakin in the hangar where the Naboo pilots were readying their sleek yellow starfighters. He had been trying to make himself useful and mostly succeeding at staying out of the way. "You shouldn't be here," she said, though without real conviction. "I'm not doing anything," he replied, which was both true and untrue. She looked at the polished curve of a fighter wing, at the mechanics moving around him, then back at his face. That is usually when the worst trouble finds you. He grinned despite himself, and for a moment she grinned too. Then the smile faded. The sounds of preparation pressed in around them. "Are you afraid?" she asked quietly. He thought of lying. "Yes. So am I." Something in him eased. Adults so rarely admitted fear. Not Watto, who hid his in cruelty. Not the Council, who hid theirs in rules. Not even Qui-Gon, whose peace seemed forged from some element Anakin did not possess. But Padme said the word, and left it standing between them, ordinary and survivable. "What do you do when you're afraid?" he asked. She looked out past the hangar mouth toward the bright sky where battle would soon bloom. "I decide what matters more." Elsewhere in the palace, Maul moved through shadowed service passages known only to architects, servants, and those patient enough to learn where great houses hid their ugliness. He had landed before the main engagement, and entered by ways no army ever considered important. He preferred palaces from inside their walls. Grandeur became anatomy there. Plumbing, lift shafts, power conduits, doors meant for hands stained by labor instead of rings. Naboo was soft in its elegance, all polished stone and curved lines and decorative light. Maul despised softness. Yet softness hid panic beautifully, and panic was everywhere now. Guards whispered into comms. Courtiers ran with messages they pretended were not desperate. Somewhere a child was crying and being shushed by a nurse who had practiced calm as duty her entire life. Through it all he tracked the Jedi and the boy. Anakin's presence moved unpredictably through the palace perimeter, too close to pilots, to mechanics, to open sky. The child was restless, unfit for stillness. Maul felt the sting of that restlessness and understood it intimately. Weapons hated being sheathed while battle breathed nearby. He could have gone to the hangar then. The possibility arrived cold and clear. A quick strike. A vanished body. Confusion. The Jedi wounded before the duel even began. He did not take it. He told himself it was because Sidious had ordered the Jedi first. Because the Queen's capture or death mattered strategically. Because time spent on the boy now would jeopardize cleaner outcomes. All of these things were true. None were the deepest truth. The deepest truth was harder, more embarrassing, and therefore undeniable. Maul did not want Anakin dead. He wanted him unfinished. He wanted the Jedi to touch him just enough to make the eventual severing exquisite. He wanted Padme's kindness, the Council's doubt, Qui-Gon's faith, Obi-Wan's caution, Shmai's absence, war itself. He wanted all of it to carve the boy into someone who would one day understand why darkness felt honest. Above the swamp fields, the Gungan army began to move. In the throne room, blaster fire erupted. In the hangar, pilots scrambled. Anakin stepped back instinctively as one starfighter lurched on its repulsors and slewed at an angle. Mechanics shouted. Someone yelled for him to clear away. He obeyed half a second too slowly and found himself swept by accident and machinery toward a cockpit not meant for him. The universe had always seemed to push him hardest when he tried to stand still. From a catwalk 2 corridors away, invisible to ordinary sight, Maul felt the motion and turned his head. The battle had begun. He smiled without joy and went to meet the Jedi. Battle shattered into pieces at once, and each piece believed itself the center. On the grassy plain beyond Theed, Gungan Fambas advanced through mist and cannon smoke, while ranks of droids marched with their soulless certainty. In the palace, the Queen and her guard moved through corridors like a blade disguised as a procession. Overhead, Naboo fighters rose to challenge the blockade, bright machines flung upward against the immense dark geometry of the droid control ship. No single eye could hold all of it. The Force did. Anakin had no business being in a cockpit. He knew that before the canopy sealed, knew it while alarms shrieked, and the fighter jolted away from the hangar, knew it with absurd clarity as space opened around him and turned every mistake mortal. Panic hit first, hot and total. He grabbed at controls, overcorrected, nearly spun into another pilot, heard someone shouting at him over comms, and for one wild instant considered surrendering to terror and letting the ship decide what to do. Then instinct arrived. Not calm. Never calm. Something faster. The fighter steadied under his hands because his hands had already begun to understand it. He felt the machine the way he felt a pod, as structure and temper and possibility. Its systems spoke in vibrations, hums, resistance under his fingers. He answered before thought could interfere. A droid starfighter flashed across his view, and he rolled away from it by reflex he could never have explained. Breath returned in pieces. The stars, which had always meant freedom to him, now meant math and death and speed and a strange, fierce joy. Below and far away, within the palace's great mouth of stone and power, Maul stepped from shadow. He chose his moment with care. The Queen's group had nearly reached the throne room. Guards were split. Focus was divided. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan moved at the rear, protecting, scanning, sensing too late that the disturbance ahead was not fear, but design. Red light burst in the corridor. Obi-Wan moved first, blue blades snapping to life. Qui-Gon followed in the same heartbeat, green meeting red as Maul drove into them with an assault too violent to be called greeting. The corridor became light and heat and echoes. Guards fell back, dragged by Panika's orders. The Queen vanished toward her own objective. The duel peeled away from politics instantly, becoming older than any government and truer than any speech. Maul had fought Jedi before in training simulations, in planned killings, in the deep private rehearsals Sidious called instruction. None felt like this. Qui-Gon's style was weathered by compassion, yes, but also by age, by confidence earned rather than inherited. Obi-Wan was cleaner, tighter, all training and quick intelligence and the brittleness of youth under control. Together, they should have been formidable in a way that bored him. Instead, they were glorious. He drove them through the palace's arteries, splitting their rhythm, forcing retreat, denying them space to coordinate. His saber staff became a spinning equation of attack and threat, each end asking a different question. He gave ground only where he wanted them to follow. He let anger sharpen without blinding, and in the core of that anger another awareness burned constantly. The boy was above them, in the sky, moving through war like a spark trying to become a star. Obi-Wan lunged. Maul turned the strike aside and hammered the younger Jedi back with a kick that rang off the corridor wall. Qui-Gon swept low. Maul vaulted, cloak snapping behind him, landed, cut, advanced. They passed through blast doors over walkways, into the power complex where humming energy columns cast blue-white glare across polished metal. The plasma gates slammed down between them in sequential barriers of scarlet force. For a moment, the duel fractured into stillness. Obi-Wan paced behind one barrier, breath hard, eyes fixed. Maul paced behind another, coiled motion in a narrow cage. Qui-Gon, trapped in the final interval nearest Maul, lowered himself to the floor and entered meditation. The act infuriated him. In the midst of battle, with death one gate away, the Jedi chose peace. Maul prowled like a trapped predator, red light reflecting off his tattoos, and reached outward through the Force in a pulse of contempt and hunger. Beyond the power complex, beyond the palace, beyond cloud and atmosphere, he found Anakin in the void around the control ship. The boy's fear was still there, but now it ran braided with exhilaration and concentration. Droids swarmed him. He twisted through them. He should not have been able to survive. Yet he did more than survive. He adapted. The gates began to rise. Maul attacked with all the fury meditation had denied him. Obi-Wan was cut away at once, sent back through momentum and angle, separated by design. Qui-Gon met the full force of the assault alone. Green and red collided in tight circles of light. Maul pressed close enough to smell sweat, singed fabric, living breath. The older Jedi's defense held for several exchanges, then began to strain. Fatigue had edges. Maul found everyone. Above, Anakin lost control, drifted, recovered, was pulled by accident and instinct toward the hangar mouth of the control ship itself. Below, Qui-Gon blocked high. Maul reversed low. The green blade came late by half a fraction. Half a fraction was enough. Red light drove through flesh. Qui-Gon staggered. Pain flashed through the Force, bright and intimate. Obi-Wan shouted from beyond the edge. The older Jedi fell to one knee, hand pressed uselessly to a wound already past saving. For an instant time folded. Maul looked into Qui-Gon's eyes and saw not hatred, not even surprise, but sorrow for the boy perhaps, or the apprentice, or the world that would continue with such wounds in it. That sorrow enraged Maul more than any curse would have. He kicked the dying Jedi aside. At the same instant, far above, Anakin's fighter shot through the control ship's interior and released destruction into its core. The Force convulsed with the deaths of droids, pilots, soldiers, chants, machinery, and plans. Across the battlefield, whole armies stuttered and fell silent. Obi-Wan's cry became something raw enough to wound the air. Maul turned to meet it. Grief transformed Obi-Wan. Before, he had fought like a disciplined blade, sharpened by training, guided by doctrine, controlled in all the ways the Jedi prized. Now control remained, but it had gone incandescent around pain. His attacks came with a speed and ferocity that would have delighted Maul under different circumstances. The younger man's face was no longer composed. Rage had cracked through it, and through the crack something purer than anger shone. Love denied its object. Good, Maul thought with savage approval. At last. They met at the lip of the shaft. The power complex roared around them. Blue-white energy columns pulsed with indifferent force. Qui-Gon lay fallen behind, every shallow breath a fading thread. The floor beneath their boots reflected red and blue in the brutal geometry of light. There was nowhere left to maneuver except inward, toward finality. Obi-Wan drove high. Maul parried and spun the lower blade for a cut at the knees. Obi-Wan vaulted it. Maul pivoted, struck with the opposite end, caught fabric, scored flesh. The younger Jedi landed badly, recovered, attacked again. Each exchange came faster than the last. Breath was no longer separate from movement. Thought was no longer separate from instinct. They had reached the place in combat where skill stripped itself to essence. Maul wanted the kill. He also wanted the lesson. He wanted the boy, still bright above and beyond, still alive, still impossible. To feel the shape of this moment through the Force, whether consciously or not. He wanted Anakin to know what the Jedi cost those who loved them. He wanted the death of Qui-Gon Jinn to echo in that enormous unfinished heart for years. So when Obi-Wan overextended, when momentum threw him past safe footing and sent him plummeting toward the shaft, Maul allowed it. The Jedi caught a dangling service lip far below with one hand. His saber fell. For one perfect beat he hung there, wounded and desperate, staring up into the furnace glow with grief still naked in his eyes. Maul approached the edge slowly. Victory should have been simple now. A downward thrust. A clean finish. Sidious pleased. The line of the Sith unbroken. The boy left to the Council, or to later manipulation. Strategy intact. But strategy had never once quickened his pulse the way this did. He stood above Obi-Wan with his saber staff humming and looked past him, through stone and distance and the living weave of the Force, toward the sky. He could feel Anakin descending in a damaged fighter, shocked by survival, elated, confused, touched by death above and below without yet understanding how deeply. The boy's future opened and closed in flashes around him. Robes, war, fire, kneeling, screaming, command, ruin. None of it fixed. All of it waiting. Mine. Some forbidden place inside Maul thought. The thought was barely formed when Obi-Wan moved. A dead Jedi's weapon rose in a blue line from below the ledge, ignited in the same instant, and cut through Maul's staff and body with one impossible stroke. For a heartbeat, Maul did not understand what had happened. There was only impact, light, the feeling of the world separating from itself. Then pain arrived so absolute it erased language. He looked down and saw ruin. His body had become two unrelated facts. He fell. The shaft swallowed light in bands. Blue, black, blue, again. Air tore at him. The severed halves of the saber staff spun away like fragments of a broken vow. Above, impossibly far already, The ledge shrank. Obi-Wan's figure vanished into glare. Hatred hit before fear could. Not hatred of pain. Pain was ordinary. Not even hatred of Obi-Wan, though that would grow in its own season. The hatred that saved him had a narrower point. Sidious would move on. Sidious would take the boy. Sidious would use the death on Naboo as he used every death, as fuel, as leverage, as the opening of a new door. And Maul, if he died here, would become only a lesson about replaceability. No. The word had no sound in vacuuming darkness, but it rang through the Force like a chain drawn taut. He struck metal, not the bottom. A maintenance grid jutted from the shaft wall, hidden in shadow. The collision broke what pain had not yet reached. For a moment, consciousness burst white. One half of his body bounced away into dark. The other slammed against the grid, tangled in torn cabling, and nearly followed. Nearly. Maul's hands, those relentless instruments trained to grip, climb, kill, endure, closed around hot metal. He hung there, half made, half dead, staring into black. Above him, the battle ended in waves he felt, rather than saw. The droid army collapsing. Relief exploding through living minds across Naboo. Mourning gathering around Qui-Gon's failing light. Sidious somewhere beyond all of it. Masked delight hidden under public grief. And brightest of all, Anakin Skywalker alive in the aftermath. His joy already shadowed by the death below. His future turning minutely on an axis no one else yet perceived. Maul dragged himself onto the grid with a sound that might once have been a scream. Time failed after that. There were only fragments, crawling through maintenance ducts slick with condensation and machine oil. Falling again and catching himself by hatred alone. The smell of scorched flesh, his own absurdly ordinary. Blackouts filled with visions not sent by prophecy but by obsession. Anakin on Tatooine grinning over an engine. Anakin at the temple before judges. Anakin in a cockpit touched by firelight. Anakin feeling, however dimly, the red shape of a warrior in the desert and in the dark. Hours later, or days, in some buried cavity beneath Theed where runoff water dripped and no one noble would ever tread, Maul woke to pain sharpened by survival. He should have died. The thought did not frighten him. It insulted him. He lay in filth beneath a palace built for beauty and understood, with a clarity that was almost peace, what remained to him. Not rank, not wholeness, not favor, only purpose, narrowed until it could pass through the eye of a needle. He would live. He would live because Sidious had not permitted it. He would live because Obi-Wan Kenobi had not finished what he began. He would live because somewhere above the clean morning pyres and the Senate speeches and the pieties of the Jedi, there was a boy the Force itself had marked, a boy of grief and longing and unspent power. And Maul had looked into that blaze and found in it the one thing stronger than obedience. Want. When at last he had strength enough to move, he dragged himself deeper into Naboo's hidden gut, into darkness fit for a thing remade by hate. Behind his eyes, the galaxy had narrowed to a single name: Anakin Skywalker. He held to it as others held to prayer. And in the black, beneath a victorious world, where no light reached and no mercy was offered, Darth Maul began to survive.